Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Our Revolution News, where we don't just tell half the story or half the truth. The guest we have this evening is Jeri Shepard, Greeley attorney, an extremely accomplished woman in the field of politics. She's one of the true leaders in the state of Colorado for progressive values. So let's not waste any time and we'll get right to it. We're going to head on over to Studio B to the Our Revolution News reporter for this interview. Take it away, Kurt.
We're just out of Iowa. We're sitting down with a very special guest. Jeri Shepard is a party advocate for the Democratic Party. She actually went to Iowa in the final few days before the caucus. We're going to talk to her to see how the energy was on the ground and who she met and a few fun stories. Jeri, good to meet you.
Hi there. Thank you for having me on. Got back from Iowa the night before last. We went out. There was about 20 some of us that went from Colorado to Iowa to volunteer for Bernie Sanders and the Bernie Sanders campaign. And we met up in the Sioux City is where they had an office there. Some of us had been out there in 2016, and that's where a lot of us had met each other. And we got to meet up again, and of course meet some new friends along the way, including the people that worked at the office. A lot of good energy, a lot of people working very hard. You know, we were trying to get the doors knocked. One thing we were lucky about is the weather actually was not too bad on the weekend, although it got quite cold on Monday, which is the actual caucus day. One of the things we were asked to do as volunteers is they wanted people to go to the precinct caucuses and in essence be caucus captains to make sure that we had a count, you know, for persuasion purposes, to make sure we had a legitimate count as how many people actually showed up, how people voted, and how many delegates they got. That was very important, and I was able to report back. And they actually sent me to a place with a 1 delegate precinct, but then there are 2 precincts. I reported back on both of those. Bernie got a delegate from the 1 delegate precinct, which is kind of cool.
Awesome.
Unfortunately, he didn't make threshold in the other precinct, but I found the people out there very cordial. Even the ones that didn't support Bernie were still polite and cordial and friendly. And most of the Iowa people I found were very good. And some of the more rural areas reminded me of some of the places I used to go out in northeast Colorado and central Wisconsin. Just basically small towns, some local businesses and things like that. I didn't get a sense of who the main employers were in some of the towns, but it was good to meet some of the local people. And Iowa people are great. And I got to go back to this really amazing Mexican food place I'd eaten at 4 years before. So that was good. And I got to turn on another friend to it. So,
The night of the caucus, the energy was quite electric, I'm sure. With your observation, who turned out the most people?
I didn't observe statewide. I was kind of in a rural area, so I wasn't really tapped into. But there were quite a few people out there, and it was good to see, people that were, enthused with their candidates. There was a high school girl who spoke for Pete Buttigieg, as an example, and it was good to see younger people involved. They had another young man who's high school as well. Got to meet a guy who supported Bernie in the larger precinct, and unfortunately didn't make threshold. But I saw people that were very engaged, very energetic, very into their candidates, and I saw that as a good thing. Whoever your candidate is, get behind him, support him, and talk him up as to why they're the best candidates. I have no problem with that process. We found out when we got back to Sioux City, I had to pick up another friend who was at another caucus site in Inville, if I recall correctly, the name of the small town. And we got back and we're finding out that everything's a total cluster. The state party had this app that didn't work. I think they tried to do it on the cheap. They didn't do the proper testing. We also found out there were some questions raised about the ownership of this app, who put in money. And of course, part of the can of worms is it appropriate, and maybe can answer for any state party, whether Republican, Democratic, or any other body, where you have to make sure that there is a guarantee of impartiality. Is it appropriate for one or more candidates to be funding technology that is used by an ostensibly neutral body? I think that's a question that we as a party are going to have to answer. In fact, in the category funding, you should mention it, all of you that go out to caucus in Colorado, we have this thing called resolutions. And we can have resolutions that are designed to make it clear that we, the grassroots, want to see our institutions and our political bodies be accountable to the people. And so I anticipate that we'll be drawing some things up, and people can draw up their own ideas and take them to their caucuses. And then, of course, it goes up to the county and then the state platform. I'm on the state platform committee is one of the things that I do. Dennis Obdusky is the chair, and you may have heard of Dennis because he was on the national platform, and he and Terry Tucker were able to get a lot of awesome amendments proposed, and he got one regarding cannabis and got the Hillary campaign a little bit flat-footed, which is kind of funny. So going back to Iowa, when we left Iowa the next morning, we still had no real idea what was going on. We understand that Mayor Buttigieg had claimed a victory, which I considered to be premature, given there's still quite a few precincts out. In fact, I think at the time he declared, there may not have been any official counts in yet.
1.99% was officially reported when he declared victory.
Right, and thank you for clarifying that. We got some preliminary information from Senator Sanders' campaign as to what was going on there. I publicized it because I think it was Jeff Weaver had already publicized it, so it was okay to do. And we're still trying to, on our way home, before taking the pit stop, I'm trying to check and see is there any new information. And we are all still trying to figure out, okay, what the heck's going on? It's looking like more and more that Bernie's starting to gain, starting to pick up people, and it's clear that he's gotten, the most people to actually show up, which given the way that delegates are allocated, you get X amount of delegates per precinct, and that's already cast in stone regardless of how many or how few show up. So that's the same similar process in Colorado. Like say, my precinct number is 114. They already have the amount of delegates designated regardless of how many people show up, and that will be picking delegates through our U.S. Senate preference. But going back to Iowa, we found out this morning, unfortunately I found out on Twitter, I got a message from a friend who was talking about Tom Pettis calling for what he called a recanvass. And, of course, the questions arise, what does that look like? The cynic in me thinks, is he calling for this because Bernie's showing signs of being ahead? Inquiring minds want to know, of course. Mm-hmm. Would he be making this call if Mayor Buttigieg had still continued to be ahead? Again, we don't know. But I think the problem is, there is a problem with communication when we are finding out important things about what the DNC is doing through social media.
Yeah, you would think you'd want it through a more official...
We would want at least some heads up. There's communication. We get emails from the DNC all the time. We get texts from the DNC. Mm-hmm. There are ways they can communicate with people who are on the body of the DNC, which I forgot to mention that I am, that to let us know what's going on. Like with the midnight convention committee picks. He could have given us a heads up, say, okay, this is what's going on at this particular meeting, and this is who we're selecting. Ideally, I'd like to see the entire body be able to weigh in, but at the very least, let us know so we can hear it from you and not hear it from some stranger on social media.
Well, maybe with Twitter, we're calling it the Trump effect. See, Twitter is now the official presidential declaration social media board. Maybe they're trying to expand their influence. I'm not sure. But I agree with you that Twitter shouldn't be where we're getting our official votes from our democracy. As far as so Bernie does look like he's going to be declared the winner in Iowa. That's good. Going forward to New Hampshire and Nevada, South Carolina. How are we looking? We got big news out of 538 this morning.
Good question. And of course, keep in mind, a poll is a snapshot.
Snapshot in time.
And you may do another poll in a day or two, and it may be a totally different snapshot. Polls should be, the only real poll that's going to count are the ones when people go to show up and vote. So don't think that Bernie's got it in the bag. Sure, it's great to see that. It's kind of a bit of a boost, but you can't take it for granted. You still got to knock the doors, make the phone calls, make the texts, show up and vote, get all your friends and families to show up and vote. That's very important.
That is an incredibly important point. In fact, I posted last night on one of your thought ideas of why aren't I seeing any energy numbers, for door knocking, phone calls numbers coming out of New Hampshire? We don't have just a one state country, so we need to continue this energy state by state by state.
I'm sure the Sanders campaign has that information, and
oh yes,
I'm sure other campaigns are doing their bit there as well to try to get their votes out. I anticipate that we will have some discussions about whether it is appropriate for Iowa and New Hampshire to continue to be the first primary and the first caucus states. I understand the people in New Hampshire and Iowa like things the way they are, and I don't blame them. But I think
revenue alone.
well, sure. Yeah, some say that a big source of tourism in Iowa is all the people that come in from out of state. And yeah, I get that. They can always find some other reason for us to come out. There are a lot of awesome things about Iowa or New Hampshire. But I think we need to discuss as a body, is this the best way to do things? We may well decide it is, but I think it's a conversation we really need to have. What that looks like, it'll be to be determined. And if the body sends me back for the next 4-year term, I'll be part of those discussions. If not, I'll certainly give my thoughts to whoever is, because I think it's important we have these discussions. Part of the can of worms, of course, is although Iowa is getting much more diverse, if you look at some of the satellite caucuses,
sure.
Working people, immigrants, people of color, African Americans, Latinos are all part of the mix. Still, both Iowa and New Hampshire are predominantly white states, and that's something that needs to be thought about.
Well, if you're going to be first in the nation with all that energy, and let's be honest, the eyes of the world were on Iowa that night, you need to take that and have responsibility for what you do. You need to make this a clean and fair and open process. It has been many, many times in the past. I don't remember these crazy stories coming out of Iowa, New Hampshire, or any other state. Florida 2000, we can point to that. But there's no reason that this time it should have been that up in the air.
Right. Well, there's some things. Even in 2016, there were still some questions raised, not to the extent that they were now. But they had questions in several states. You know, New York changed their registration deadline. Right. It used to be like 6 months in advance. You had to affiliate as a Dem if you were already registered. And a lot of people didn't know that. Thank goodness Governor Cuomo signed the bill. That was the reform specifically recommended by the DNC. They've actually implemented some reforms that were good. There were questions raised in 2016, like Arizona was a problem. There were a lot of problems in California in terms of, you know, people with no party preferences weren't necessarily getting the ballots that they were entitled to.
They were getting
in fact, the campaigns are encouraging people, register if you're in a state where you register as a Dem just to make sure there aren't any problems. You can always unaffiliate after the election. But I think it's important that we be able to get our votes out, because we're working our hearts out to try to get Bernie to the White House, not just to get him into the White House, but to transform our country and to save our planet.
Absolutely, but as you brought up California, there's a few other problems. They've gone to a digital ballot system this time, and Bernie's actually on the 3rd page. There's actually 12 pages in California of presidential candidates. Believe it or not. This was reported by TYT. But Bernie's on the 3rd page. Cenk in the 25th District is on the 4th and 6th page.
Well, it's not like they're having multiple primaries, not just, because I know in Colorado we just have presidential and the rest of our primaries on June 30th. And I think what you have to do is just teach your people, this is your ballot, this is where you go to vote for X candidate for president. Whoever your favorite is on this page. If you're voting in a congressional primary, this is where your favorite candidate is, and vote accordingly. One thing that's interesting about California, they have what's called a jungle primary system, which I think I can see advantages and disadvantages to that. But what it could mean is that it's conceivable, and it has happened before, that the top 2 may be either both Dems or both Republicans, depending on how the jungle primary shakes out.
Moving away from Iowa politics and the national politics now into the national government. Bill Barr was reporting saying the only person that can investigate or say anything against what the president does is Bill Barr.
That's bull hockey.
Sure it is, but they will rule like that.
Well, that's the unfortunate thing. A lot of things, the theory behind our country is supposed to be a system of checks and balances. We already know that the checks and balances have been eviscerated on the legislative level, and there are definite questions raised about it being still in place on the judicial level. So the worry is that, in essence, we've got a situation where the executive branch can do whatever it wants. I've been saying pretty much all my adult life that we were heading towards a police state. I didn't think it would get to this level. I really didn't, but, and the problem seems to be is, it's almost like they're playing a game of how low can you go? Or, here, we can go even lower. No, we can go even lower. Hold my beer.
Hold my beer, right.
And the thing is, it's almost like These people want to crater our country and crater our planet just to own the libs. Okay, really?
Wow.
They have children, they have grandchildren. And if you've read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, you know, wealthy people can stay on the top of the heap for a while longer if your society's cratering, but not for much longer.
Right.
So and ultimately they're going to collapse too. And
we're all in the same boat.
And what they fail to understand is this system is not sustainable. Now, is the solution to get random Democrat into office? Well, certainly any Democrat that's on the ballot now is going to likely be better than the sociopath. But the worry is that if whoever gets into the White House doesn't have the will to A, undo the damage, B, advocate for our grassroots people, for people who are struggling, for poor people, for people of color, for those who have been marginalized. If they don't have the political will to stand up for those people, then we're going to be back where we are with another sociopath or a sociopath successor or something like that.
You're quite right. I would predict if, let's say, you elect a Vice President Joe Biden to president, and he keeps the same very economic neoliberal ideas in place, and nothing changes in 4 or 8 years of people's wages and standards of living. If you think Trump 1.0 bad, there are other Trumps out there. Now, that person may not be as blusterous and might be not as crazy, but that actually would make him more dangerous. So Trump 2.0, if nothing changes economically in people's wallets and how they feel about their nation and how they're living, Trump 2.0 will be worse than Trump 1.0.
There is some truth to that, because the worry is that if somebody goes in there who is equally sociopathic but is able to pretend to be normal and pretend to be able to care about this country, then we could be in a world of hurt. We have a system that is unsustainable. It is unsustainable to ask people to work multiple jobs and still not be able to have a place to live, still not be able to feed your families, be able to send your kids to school, you know. And meanwhile, they want to lecture us about socialism when these people are the biggest welfare baby socialist, grifters. How much is that sociopath in chief spending in Mar-a-Lago for his little golf adventures?
Today, $286 million.
Thank you for that information.
Which is 118 years of presidential salaries.
And how much are we spending for tax breaks for our wealthy buddies, knowing that working class people pay a higher tax rate than millionaires and billionaires? Borrowing a phrase from Chris Rock, that ain't right.
That ain't right. Absolutely.
And endless wars, how much money, and they don't ask how much endless war costs or tax breaks or corporate welfare.
No.
It's only when you've got things that benefit regular people. Oh, we gotta find out how much it costs. Even if it saves money, which there's evidence that a single payer / Medicare for all system will save money overall and get people treated. In fact, I can add, the 208 study was done when Jim Reesberg was our state rep in House District 50 in Colorado. And they had a study of 5 different systems they studied. There was one system that got everybody health care and one system that saved money, and that was single payer.
Wow, and not only save money through single payer health care, how about we know through, 50 years of data, global data, that every dollar you spend on a child equates $8 or $9 in tax revenue through his life, because a healthy child is a healthy adult, and they work harder longer and they make more money. So not only save money, but actually make money. And there again, with the after-school programs, Governor Schwarzenegger was very saying, we know that every dollar we spend on an after-school program will come back to us for $7 in our GDP. So on every system or every system that they want to spend money on, being tax subsidies for the oils, for the banks, for the deregulations, for the endless wars, they make money for few. They don't save money for nobody. To where you spend money on social programs such as early childhood education, healthcare, Medicare for all, and the list goes on, you make money, save money for all, not just a few.
That is the absolute truth. And part of what's also being discussed is the Green New Deal. Many of us have been talking about a WPA type program for decades.
Absolutely. Let's get into that. The Green New Deal question. The huge price tag, $16.4 trillion. It's over a 10-year period. Actually, I think it's a 15-year period. Will that bankrupt America?
I doubt it, although the pundits seem to think so the way they ask their questions. How are we going to pay for it? When are they going to ask for how are we going to pay for the endless wars? Like, there are great social costs, and economists could try to quantify them if they were inclined. How much does it cost to lock people up in prisons when they don't have jobs? How much does it cost when you have a market incentive to lock people up, i.e. through our private prisons?
Right.
How much does the drug war cost? How much does it cost to try to have programs that you spend a lot of the money in administration where you just gave people a job and had to make a decent living off that job and have health care and everything? It used to be the liberals and conservatives could agree that the best social program is a job. I think we're going to need to talk to about in our Green New Deal implementation is making sure that people currently working in oil and gas, I don't want them on the street. They got families. They don't want to be on the street.
Right.
But we want to make sure that any jobs that they can transition to pay as well as oil and gas. There's probably the interplay of unions that's going to help that. And I know Bernie Sanders has called for more people to be in unions.
Absolutely.
Because
and with these Green New Deal jobs, they will be union jobs. Not only Green New Deal will not bankrupt the nation, will actually springboard us into a 21st century economy with 21st century kind of jobs, focusing around solar, geothermal, and wind and other green new energies. When you produce energy, you produce the future.
That's
when
true.
you produce new science, you produce new industries. And when you produce brand new whole industries, you create hundreds of thousands and millions of jobs. This is not my theory. This is worked out over hundreds of years. When you study scientific discovery, economic stability comes right along with it, because science creates prosperity.
Yeah.
So the Green New Deal is exactly what we need for the future. But it's not just about energy production. It's very based on the original New Deal, which before that was the Square Deal. I call Bernie Sanders the real deal.
Okay.
So with the Green New Deal, also higher minimum wage, $15 an hour. We
Plus.
need that. Plus.
Because I think in some places,
It should be higher than 15.
right.
We need teachers making a minimum of $60,000 a year. We need the biggest one of all, money out of our politics. America, you make this decision with us, and you get money out of your politics. In 10, 15 years, you have a completely different America, to where the corruption doesn't overtake your democratic process.
Let me interject something
Sure.
here. Part of the costs that they often do not quantify, economists use the word externalities.
Okay.
Remember, when they've got all this stuff spewing into the air and spewing into the water and into the ground, guess who gets stuck with the bill? Not the oil and gas companies.
No.
Landowners, the taxpayers, the people who get sick, who pays those bills?
The cows.
Some of that comes back to us. Future generations. You look at some of these pictures that they have. We got some of these brown cloud pictures that are happening, but yet it's even a bridge too far for them to have to pay the taxes that are fairly low in this state. Even that's a bridge too far for these oil and gas people. They don't want to pay their taxes. We have to pay our taxes, and they sure as heck don't want to be stuck with having to clean up the messes they made. Now, I don't know about you. When I was growing up, if I made a mess, my mom made sure that I cleaned it up. Were they not listening to their mothers?
It's pretty simple.
You got to listen to your mother and clean up after yourself and clean the planet.
And Mom was right, that TV will rot your brain, at least on corporate media. So
Yeah.
Mom was right in two areas. You gave a perfect illustration of how, what we call in this house anyway, national corporate socialism. And that's the system we're in. What Jeri described was, when the streams, when the land, when your animals, when your children get sick because of lack of regulations on the polluters, who has to pay for that? Mom and Dad does, the community does, the state and local taxes do. With national corporate socialism, all profits to the wealthy, all misery, pain, and suffering as far as medical bills, lack of ability to drink clean water, dead crops, dead animals, things like that, all pain to the people. All profits to the wealthy. That's what national corporate socialism is. And that's the system to which we live. So when you bitch and scream, I don't want that Bernie Sanders, he's a socialist. Well, he's a socialist for the people, and I would say a democratic socialist, much like FDR was, and Albert Einstein, and Eugene Debs, and a whole bunch of other iconic American people were. A democratic socialist, not a Norwegian-style socialist. But I'd much rather live in that system than J.P. Morgan getting hundreds of billions of dollars simply because they asked, or they intentionally crashed the economy and held a gun to the government's head. I'd much rather a regular democratic system than a national corporate socialism system.
Well, and part of it is that, yeah, it's the old privatize the profits and socialize the losses.
Yes.
Some even will
She said
say,
it better than me. You said it much better.
and some will say that Bernie is basically a social democrat in most European systems. You know, I myself, I'm an FDR Democrat. I own it. And, you know, the radical notion that our system should work for all of us and not just, you know, the few at the top. And that's a system we've been trying. And it just, to borrow a phrase from the teenage girls, this is so not working.
There you go. So I enjoyed talking about Iowa and the national ideas and what we need to do to move this country forward. But let's get local, because so many people say all politics is local. Here in Colorado, we have CD4, the largest section of our state for House, U.S. House. It is currently held by Ken Buck. I understand you know a bit about Ken Buck.
Well, he has not done a good job for us, to say the least. Unfortunately, he has a vision of, you know, an extreme vision. If he were a ski slope, he would be a double black diamond. I think the problem with Ken Buck is that he has a narrow set of interests that he needs to placate. And it isn't the people, aren't the people of CD4. He doesn't give a flying fart about them, from what I can tell. What we need is somebody in there, and I think we have a couple of candidates floating around, but we need somebody who will boot him out, hold him accountable for his bad choices that actually hurt people. It's not like he's going in there doing a bang-up job for us or, you know, showing some independence. It's going to be like whatever Donald Trump wants, Ken Buck's going to give it to him. And whatever the extremes in the party want, I guess one can question whether there's even such thing as a moderate Republican anymore.
Right.
But, you know, it's like he's going to see how many he
I
can
would
get.
say moderate Republican, Mitt Romney.
Romney did the right thing, and I give him respect for that. We'll save for another day where my points of disagreement with him are, but I will give him respect for at least doing something to ensure accountability, which has eluded us. We've said the message clear that, you know, this merry gang of sociopaths are going to do whatever they want. We just have to hope there's a country left when they're done.
Right, absolutely. About turning CD4 blue, we're asking our viewers if we have stories from people you know or your own personal stories about what Medicare for All would do for you. What taking away food stamps would do to either you or somebody you know. Things the Republicans, what destroying regulations for your land and your water to benefit the oil and gas companies. What would these things do in your life? So then we can make a commercial to help turn CD4 blue with the Democratic candidates. So if you can think of that story, make that quick phone video, send it to the email down below so we can cut that together and make a good video for 2020's general election.
And remember, we've got not just the presidential race, we've got U.S. Senate race, we've got all the CDs in Congress are coming up. We also have State House, we have State Senate, County Commissioners. Pay attention to all the races. All of those races are important. Politics is survival, and we want to choose to survive. And Bernie himself said it the best. It is better to show up than to give up. So when you get your ballots, vote, damn it.
I not only agree with it's better to show up than to give up, but I also agree with another thing he says. Are you willing to fight for someone you don't know? To me, that's an essence of Americana. That really is an essence of what America stands for. Are you willing to fight for someone you don't know?
And insert shameless plug for Bernie, of course.
No problem. I'll do it all day long. Thank you all so very much for joining us on a edition of Our Revolution Reports. We're going to leave you with one thing. Predictions for the primary? Any ideas?
We'll find out.
We'll find out. I think Bernie's in a good spot, but keep knocking the doors, keep making the phone calls, keep doing the work, and we'll get him over the finish line.
And get your ballots in.
Yes. Make sure, show up, stand up, be counted, vote. Our revolution.
The revolution will not be televised.